To outsiders, the European Union might look like a bunch of pencil pushing, bureaucracy, and paperwork. And you might be right. However, the European Union has also managed to unite 27 democracies into an economic and political confederation like never seen before in history, boasting a combined GDP of $18 trillion and having made the remarkable achievement of breaking down the borders between more than 450 million people. But what actually is the European Union, and what does it actually do? Well, to answer those questions, we need to take a quick history lesson. The foundations of the European Union actually started with an organization called the European Coal and Steel Community. The ECSC was founded in 1951 on the basis that if everyone had the same free market access to coal and steel, it would drive down not only the cost of goods and production, but also drive down the chance of war, which is generally considered to be a pretty good thing, depending on who you ask. This proto-EU consisted of an all-star cast featuring the likes of France, Italy, the Benelux, and Germany. Well, half of Germany. Maybe like 2/3 of Germany. This little economic union actually turned out to be a massive success, and just 6 years later, those same 6 nations signed the Treaty of Rome and reorganized the European Coal and Steel Community into the much more simply named European Economic Community, which is closer to the European Union, but not quite. I mean, it's like when you get a yellow in Wordle. Over the next 30 years, the European Economic Community expanded its membership and its scope, picking up new members all across Europe and expanding its policy platform to include the likes of domestic policies, such as border control. Finally, in 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, and soon after, so did most of the Eastern Bloc, opening up the other half of Europe to capitalism, the West, and the free market, which are basically the same thing. 4 years later, the members of the European Economic Community signed the Maastricht Treaty, which paved the way for the Euro, European citizenship, and the European Union as we know and sometimes love it today. So, with all that said, what actually is the European Union as we know and sometimes love it today? Well, it's a lot. The European Union is often described by the Latin phrase sui generis, meaning of its own kind. At its broadest level, the European Union is a supranational political and economic union with massive influence over the trade, travel, and to some extent the defense of its member nations, among other things. The European Union is managed by 7 major institutions, and this is to some extent where the European Union gets its overly bureaucratic reputation. See, the European Union is headed by 2 councils, 2 courts, a commission, a central bank, and a parliament, each of them serving a very vital role in being a sort of government. However, 3 of them do the heavy lifting for the purposes of this video. The European Parliament makes up 1/2 of the legislative arm of the Union. The European Parliament is comprised of an insane 720 members, each from any one of the 27 member states. This parliament represents the people of the EU, working out to about 1 member per 625,000 people, if you were curious. The European Council, in contrast, consists of just 27 members, 1 from each of the member states. Rather than being full-time members of the Council, these are instead national ministers from each of their respective countries, who are sent to represent their national government directly in relevant affairs. So, for example, you might send the Minister of Finance for financial issues, the Minister of Environment for environmental issues, and so on and so forth. These 2 institutions work together to shape all of Europe, debating and passing laws, coordinating national policy, and deciding the European budget every single year. They also work to appoint the European Commission, the executive branch of the EU. Just like the Council, the European Commission consists of 1 member per nation. However, unlike the Council, these commissioners are not supposed to work towards their nation's benefit at all, instead working towards serving all of Europe. The Commission is also headed by a president, who acts as the de facto leader of the European Union. Currently, it's this lovely lady. Now, in terms of what the European Union actually does, there are 3 main purposes. Firstly, the European Union unites every single member state into a unified commercial market, making the aforementioned trade and travel infinitely easier than it would be otherwise. There is a lot that goes into making this possible, but there are 2 core elements: the Schengen area and the Euro. Although open borders probably sound like a Texan's worst nightmares, they have been game-changing for Europe in all the right ways. Every single day, a reported 3.5 million people all across Europe cross national borders for work, study, or personal reasons. Additionally, the Schengen area has made land shipping in Europe practically seamless. Now onto the euro, where it can get a little bit complex and a little bit too economical for a main channel video. So to put it simply, the euro reduces currency transaction fees for businesses, can push business competition across borders, and of course it complements the Schengen area quite well. You can cross a border and back and use the exact same currency with no problems at all. I mean, open borders wouldn't really make sense if you had to use a dozen different currencies in a single week, would it? With this unified market, the European Union signs trade deals on behalf of all of its member states, leveraging the diplomatic weight that comes with its sheer size in order to negotiate better deals. The second role of the EU is unifying the policy of its member states in key areas like environment, agriculture, energy, and defense. Through these policy platforms, the EU implements agricultural subsidies, leads the way in carbon emission reductions, protects natural waterways, and monitors security threats that could be from any nation, none in particular. This unified policy is often crucial to the unified market, ensuring that businesses across the continent have to play by the same rules. But additionally, this policymaking is actually one of the key flashpoints that led to Brexit, and is why some nations might be a little hesitant to join the EU. See, in a country like Australia, we have the ability to make fast, efficient policies that serve the needs of our people. We don't always do it, but in theory we can. However, EU policy overrules national policy, meaning if those continental policies don't quite work in your nation's favor, you're pretty much out of luck. For example, those aforementioned agricultural subsidies have traditionally benefited huge agricultural markets like those in France and Italy. However, they're a lot less meaningful for a nation that have a completely different economic composition. The third role of the EU is the standardization of the rights of its people. This is covered in the Charter of the Fundamental Rights of the European Union. This charter is split into 54 articles guaranteeing EU citizens essential rights in relation to dignity, freedom, equality, solidarity, citizenship, justice, and more. These rights were tested time and time again by the thankfully former Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who restricted the rights of refugees, children, the LGBT, the press, just so many people. He was just the worst. So the EU responded in kind by freezing 17 billion euros in resilience and support funding that was headed towards Budapest. The ECJ also hit Hungary with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of fines in direct response to Orban's treatment of asylum seekers. Since Orban's removal from power, the new government in Hungary has been working to unfreeze those aforementioned $17 billion in frozen money, and to get the country's economy back on track. If that sounds interesting to you, you should stick around. It's a topic I plan on covering soon. Now back to the EU, it's worth mentioning it can get a little fluid in respect to who its rules actually apply to. See, the Schengen area actually consists of 29 member states, with Switzerland and Norway both gaining access despite not being full EU members. However, in contrast, the euro is only accepted by 21 member countries, with Denmark, Sweden, and much of Eastern Europe rejecting the currency outright. The wishy-washy nature of these policies often comes from a place of national sovereignty, with the people or the government perhaps being a little hesitant to hand over control of their interest rates, inflation, and the ability to give their currency funny nicknames. But at the same time, seeing the objective benefits of being able to duck across the borders for a cup of coffee. However, considering the turbulent nature of European history, and especially Eastern European history, it's more than understandable why some of these nations might want to hold onto their sovereignty for just a little bit longer. So there you go, that's the European Union explained without overloading your brain with information. Now admittedly, the EU isn't perfect. It's bloated, overly bureaucratic, and sometimes it doesn't treat all of its member states equally. However, it also provides every single one of its member states with a level of interconnectivity, global leverage, and economic potential that would otherwise be impossible. Thank you so much for watching. If we missed anything, be sure to comment down below, and if you enjoyed, like and be sure to subscribe. This has been Envy.